On the night my mother-in-law stood up in front of everyone at my husband's firm party and announced that he deserved someone better, I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just reached into my clutch, pulled out my phone, and sent one text message. 3 words. Come get me. What happened next is the part no one in that ballroom expected. But before I get there, let me tell you how I ended up in that room in the first place. My name is Brooke. I'm 28 years old. I grew up in a house outside of Asheville, North Carolina, the kind of house where you had a back porch and a long driveway, and your dad came home every evening smelling like sawdust. Except my dad didn't smell like sawdust. He smelled like whatever cologne he wore to meetings, because my father spent most of his time in boardrooms and on phone calls and flying somewhere for work. He was quiet about it. That's the thing people never understand about him. He never made it a performance. His name is not important yet. What matters is this. When I was 23, I moved to Charlotte for a job at a mid-sized marketing firm, and I told almost no one who my father was, not because I was ashamed, but because every single time someone found out, something shifted. The way they looked at me changed. The way they spoke to me changed. Suddenly, I became a door instead of a person, a means to something. I had watched it happen enough times that I just stopped volunteering the information. So in Charlotte, I was just Brooke. I rented a 2-bedroom apartment with a coworker named Jess. I took the bus when parking was a nightmare, and I brought my own lunch 4 days out of 5 because the sandwiches at the deli near the office were honestly not worth $11. That was my life. Ordinary, quiet, mine. I met my husband at a work conference in uptown Charlotte. He was there representing his family's commercial real estate firm. He had easy confidence, the kind that doesn't need to prove anything, and he made me laugh twice in the first 10 minutes of conversation. His name was Donovan. Don. He had dark eyes and a habit of running his hand through his hair when he was thinking, and when I told him I worked in marketing, he asked real questions, not polite ones. He actually wanted to know. We talked for 2 hours that first night. Exchanged numbers. He texted me the next morning with a coffee recommendation near my office, just because I'd mentioned I hadn't found a good place yet. That was the moment I think I started falling. Not the grand gesture, the small one. We dated for 8 months before he asked me to meet his family. By then I knew I loved him. By then I had also made a quiet decision. I hadn't lied to him. Not exactly. I had just never gone into detail. When he asked about my family early on, I told him my dad was in business, that we were close, that he traveled a lot. All true. I left out the part about the name, the scope, the thing that would have made Donovan look at me the way everyone else did. I wanted to be chosen for me, just me, and he was choosing me. I could feel it. Meeting his family for the first time was at Sunday dinner at their home in Myers Park. The house was large and immaculate, the kind of place where every surface had been carefully selected. His mother, Renata, greeted me at the door with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. His father, Gerald, shook my hand and asked where I was from in a tone that made the question feel like a screening. His sister, Vanessa, looked me up and down once and then busied herself refilling wine glasses. The dinner itself was fine on the surface, but there were small cuts throughout. Renata asked about my family's background in a way that made clear she was looking for something specific. And when my answers were vague, the table went slightly quiet in a way that felt deliberate. Gerald asked whether my father had any connections in commercial development. I said he had his own work. Gerald nodded slowly and changed the subject. On the drive home, Donovan was quiet for a few minutes. Then he reached over and took my hand. "There's a lot to take in," he said. "I know." "I can handle it," I told him. And I believed it. We got engaged 14 months after we met. The proposal was private, just the 2 of us on the Blue Ridge Parkway at sunset, a ring that he'd actually thought about because he'd noticed the kind of jewelry I wore. It was perfect. It was the most seen I had ever felt. His family's reaction was a different experience entirely. Renata called Donovan the next morning, and I could hear pieces of the conversation from the other room. Words like rushed and do we even know her family, and Donovan, your future matters. He came into the kitchen afterward and made coffee without saying much. I didn't ask, I understood. The months leading up to the wedding were a slow accumulation of small hostilities. Renata had opinions about every detail and made clear, without ever saying it directly, that my opinions were decoration. She referred to my side of the family as Brooke's people when talking to caterers and vendors, and said it with just enough lightness that calling it out would have seemed oversensitive. Gerald ignored me at family dinners with a thoroughness that felt almost architectural. Vanessa once said, in front of 3 other people, that she'd assumed Donovan would end up with someone from their world. Then she laughed like it was a joke. Donovan defended me, at first. He told his mother to back off twice, told his sister it wasn't funny, told his father that Brooke is going to be my wife, so you need to find a way. But over time, the repetition wore him down. I could see it. The way you watch someone slowly stop swimming against a current. He still loved me. I believe that. But love doesn't always hold its shape under that kind of pressure. The wedding was beautiful. My father walked me down the aisle. He cried, quietly, which is the only way he ever does anything. Donovan cried too. For one afternoon, everything felt like it had always been meant to be this way. Then we came home to real life. The first year of marriage was hard in ways I hadn't prepared for. We lived 20 minutes from his parents. Sunday dinners became a standing expectation, and at those dinners I was a ghost. Renata talked around me. Gerald talked through me. Vanessa had moved on to a kind of polite indifference that was almost worse than open hostility because at least hostility acknowledged my presence. Donovan stopped correcting them. That was the part that hollowed something out in me. He didn't join in. He wasn't cruel. He just went quiet. He picked up his fork and he ate his dinner and he let the conversation move on, and I sat there next to him feeling like I was watching myself disappear one Sunday at a time. I told myself it would change. I made excuses I didn't fully believe. I held on because I had loved this man with everything I had, and I wasn't ready to accept that the person I'd married was capable of that kind of silence. The firm party was Donovan's firm. His family's commercial real estate business held a client appreciation event every year at a hotel ballroom downtown. Black tie, around 200 people. The year before, I had attended and kept quiet and smiled and felt like furniture. This year, Renata had called me 3 days before to say she expected me to be present and appropriate, which I chose to interpret as a compliment because the alternative was exhausting. I wore a navy dress. I did my hair. I was, by any reasonable measure, present and appropriate. For the first 2 hours, things were almost normal. Donovan was in work mode, moving through the room with ease, talking to clients, laughing at the right moments. I held my own in conversation with people I'd never met and would likely never see again. I drank 1 glass of champagne slowly and reminded myself that this was just one night. Then Gerald called for attention near the front of the room. He had a microphone. He was thanking clients, recognizing staff, doing the things you do at these events. And then he paused, with the particular pause of a man who has planned what comes next, and he said he wanted to take a moment to speak honestly. I felt my shoulders tighten before I understood why. Our family, he said, has built everything you see here on the foundation of the right partnerships, the right decisions, the right connections. He looked at Donovan. My son is talented. He has a future in this business that goes well beyond what we've accomplished so far. He smiled. But a man's future is also shaped by who stands beside him. The room was quiet, attentive, 200 people holding champagne glasses. I think we all want what's best for those we love, Gerald continued. And sometimes loving someone means being honest, even when it's uncomfortable. Donovan's jaw tightened slightly. I saw it. Donovan could have had any number of partnerships, Gerald said, the word racked in enough context that everyone in the room understood what he meant. He made his choice, and our family has been patient. He set his glass down. But patience has a limit, and I think on a night like tonight, it's worth being clear. He looked at me. Brooke has been part of this family for a year now. She has brought nothing to this firm, no connections, no foundation, no understanding of what we've built or what it requires. He paused. My son deserves a partner who can stand at his level, and that is not what he has. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then the murmuring started. I looked at Donovan. He was looking at his father. His expression was unreadable, and that unreadability was its own answer, and something inside me that had been hanging by a thread for 12 months finally let go. I took 1 breath. Then I said, clearly and quietly, Gerald, that's enough. It came out steadier than I expected. 200 people heard it. Gerald turned to look at me with the kind of expression that assumes this will be the end of my participation. Brooke, he said, with a patience that wasn't patient at all. "This is a family conversation." "You said it in front of 200 people," I said. "It stopped being private when you picked up the microphone." A few people near the front actually shifted back slightly. Renata appeared at Gerald's side. "You need to understand your place," she said, her voice low and deliberate. "You came into this family with nothing. You have built nothing. And everyone in this room knows it." Donovan said nothing. That was the moment. Not the public humiliation, not Gerald's speech. The moment was my husband standing 4 feet away from me while his mother told me I was nothing, and he said absolutely nothing. I felt something leave my body, not sadness, something more like clarity. I reached into my clutch and took out my phone. My hands were not shaking. That surprised me. I opened my messages and typed 3 words to the one contact I hadn't used in this city, in this life. In this version of myself I had been trying so hard to build on my own terms. "Come get me." I sent it. I put the phone back in my clutch. Gerald laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "Is she calling someone? Who exactly is she going to call?" Renata smiled. "She told Donovan she barely had any family. She has no one here." That part was almost true. I had kept my father away from all of this deliberately. He had offered more than once. He had told me, in his quiet way, that he didn't like what he was hearing. I had asked him to let me handle it. I was stubborn about that. I believed I could fix things on my own. I believed love was enough. I had been wrong about that, but I had not been wrong about my father. I stood where I was. I didn't move to a corner, didn't try to make myself smaller, didn't pretend to look at my phone. I stood in the middle of that room and I waited. 11 minutes later, the ballroom doors opened. The room had been returning to its noise, conversation slowly resuming, the way people reassemble after watching something uncomfortable. But the door's opening cut through it. My father walked in. He doesn't walk fast. He never has. He walks like a man who knows where he is going and sees no reason to rush, and that particular quality, that unhurried certainty, does something to a room. People noticed him before they knew who he was, the way you notice weather before it arrives. He was wearing a suit, not black tie, because he had not been planning to come to a party. He had been at dinner 2 miles away, because he had driven up from Asheville that afternoon without telling me, because that is the kind of man he is. He had known, the way he always knew, that I might need him even when I said I didn't. He crossed the room directly to me. He didn't look at anyone else. He stopped in front of me and he looked at my face, the way fathers look at their children's faces when they are trying to find the damage, and I watched something harden in his expression when he found it. "Dad," I said. My voice came out smaller than I intended. "I'm here," he said. Gerald stepped forward, processing this. "I'm sorry, who are you?" My father looked at him. He has gray at his temples now, and the kind of face that has been through things. He looked at Gerald the way you might look at a problem you've encountered before and know exactly how to handle. "I'm her father," he said. Gerald laughed slightly. "And what is it you do exactly?" There was a woman near the back of the room who recognized him first. I heard her say his name to the person beside her, not loudly, just a statement of fact. Then I heard it move like a current, name to name to name. The color drained from Donovan's face incrementally. I watched it happen. "Sir," Donovan said. His voice had changed completely. I've heard your name. You're the—" "Yes," my father said simply. "My father's company is one of the largest private equity and real estate development firms on the East Coast. He has been building it since before I was born. He doesn't advertise. He doesn't do profiles. He operates with a quietness that I have always found both admirable and slightly inconvenient. In this moment, for the first time in my life, the inconvenience was on someone else." Gerald had gone very still. The speech about foundations and right partnerships was still technically in the air. "Gerald," my father said in the same tone he uses for everything, even things that matter enormously, "I heard most of what you said tonight. I heard all of what your wife said." He paused. "I want you to know that I have been aware of this situation for some time. My daughter asked me to stay out of it. I respected that. I'm less inclined to respect it now." "Sir, there's been a misunderstanding," Joe began. "I don't think there has been," my father said. "I think you said exactly what you meant. You told your son's wife, in front of 200 people, that she had brought nothing and was worth nothing. You said that clearly." He looked at Gerald steadily. What I'd like you to understand is that your firm has been in conversations with my company's investment group for the past 7 months about a portfolio acquisition. I had been following those conversations with some interest. He let that sit for a moment. I will no longer be following them at all. The room was silent in a way that felt physical. Donovan took a step toward me. Brooke, I didn't know. I want you to understand, I had no idea who. I know you didn't know, I said. That's not the problem. He stopped. The problem, I said, is that you knew who I was. You knew me. You knew what was happening in that room every Sunday for a year. You knew what your mother said tonight, and you said nothing. I looked at him, at the face I had loved genuinely and without reservation, at the person I had built a whole life around. You didn't need to know who my father was to stand up for me. You just needed to love me enough to do it. His eyes were wet. I believe that was real. I'm sorry, he said. I am so sorry, Brooke. I know, I said. I believe you. I picked up my clutch from where I'd set it on a table. It's not enough. My father stepped beside me. Not in front of me. Beside me. That was always the way he did things. I looked at Gerald one last time, and Renata, and Vanessa, who had appeared from somewhere and was now standing at the edge of the small space that had formed around us, her expression doing something complicated. You were so focused on what I didn't have, I said. You never once asked what I did. I turned and walked toward the doors. My father walked with me. Neither of us looked back. In the car, he didn't say anything for a while. He drove, and I looked out the window at the city, at the lights reflecting off the buildings, at the ordinary Thursday night world continuing outside. You held on a long time, he finally said. I know. That was your choice to make. I know that too. He was quiet again for a moment. Then, you don't have to have it all figured out tonight. I leaned my head back against the seat. I thought about the drive back to an apartment that was technically half mine and half a life I no longer recognized. I thought about what would come next, the paperwork and the conversations and the grief that I already knew was going to hit me in waves over the coming weeks and months. But underneath all of it, underneath everything I had lost and would lose, there was something I had not expected to feel. Solid, like something had been set down that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. I know who I am, I said, not to him really, more to the window. My father nodded once, like that was the only answer that had ever mattered. I had walked into that room as someone's wife, someone's daughter-in-law, the woman without the right connections, the woman who didn't belong. I had walked out as exactly who I had always been, before anyone's opinion of me had ever entered the picture. The city moved past the windows. My father drove. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I was not waiting for someone to see me. I already knew what was there. I keep coming back to the moment Gerald set down his champagne glass. Not the words he said, I've gone over those enough, but the moment right before, when he paused and looked at the room like a man who had already decided how this would end. That pause tells me everything I need to understand about how I got there and why I stayed as long as I did. The truth is, people like Gerald don't become that way overnight. That kind of contempt is built slowly, decision by decision, each one going unchallenged, and the people around them, the ones who stay quiet, who change the subject, who pick up their forks and eat their dinners. They're part of how it keeps going. Donovan wasn't a cruel person. I want to be clear about that. But kindness that only exists in private, that disappears the moment it costs something, isn't really protection, it's comfort. And I had confused the two for a long time. I think about who I was when I first moved to Charlotte, eating $11 sandwiches not because I couldn't afford better, but because I was trying genuinely and stubbornly to be just a person, to be seen without the noise. That instinct wasn't wrong. Wanting to be known for what you actually are, not what you come from. There's something real in that. But I let that instinct become a kind of hiding, and hiding has a cost. I kept my father at a distance. I kept my own voice at a distance. I told myself I was being strong by enduring things I should have named a long time ago. What I know now is that real strength isn't endurance. Endurance alone is just waiting. Real strength is knowing when to stop waiting, and having the clarity to recognize that moment when it arrives. For me, it arrived when Donovan stood 4 feet away from me and said nothing. Not the slap in the original story, but something quieter and, in its own way, more final. Silence from someone who knows better is its own kind of answer. The other thing I've had to sit with is this. I am not separate from the choices I made. I chose to stay. I chose to absorb things I should have challenged. I told myself I was keeping the peace, but I was really just postponing a reckoning I was afraid to face. Owning that isn't about blame. It's about understanding that the life you accept you are also building, whether you mean to or not. My father walked in that night and said almost nothing. He didn't need to. He stood beside me and let the room do the math. That's not power for its own sake. That's what happens when a person has spent decades doing things the right way, quietly, without needing anyone to see it. The results speak eventually. They always do. I walked out of that ballroom carrying less than I'd walked in with, in the best possible sense. Less performance, less pretending. Less of a life built around hoping someone would finally decide I was worth defending. What I carried out instead was something I'd had the whole time. I just finally stopped leaving it at the door.